want to reach out to me directly, it's amills@cityofsantacruz.com, not .gov, but .com. And then my direct line on my desk is 831-420-5816.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our community cafe. You could be watching this on either CTV or on Facebook Live or at our YouTube channel. Either way, we're happy to have you watching. I'm really excited to be having a conversation today with our Santa Cruz Police Chief, Andy Mills. What is your role at the City of Santa Cruz? And how did you end up in this position? Sort of what was your journey into this leadership position?
So first of all, thank you, Martine, for inviting me to be on your podcast television show. I'm not sure what you call it. I think you're the new Oprah Winfrey of Santa Cruz. And I just want to also thank you for your leadership. I mean, your data-driven approach with evidence-based policies has really helped kind of set the course for what we see here in Santa Cruz. And I think that's really important. So thank you so much for all that you've done. My journey here was kind of straightforward, I guess. After spending a long time in San Diego, over 30 years, and then knowing that I wanted to continue in policing, it wasn't quite done yet. I went to Eureka, was chief there for a while, and then this opened up and a recruiter mentioned it to me and took a look at, came down to Santa Cruz, and Kathy and I fell in love with one of the most beautiful cities on the coast and said, yeah, that might work. And so we have, put our resume and stuff together, talked with the recruiter, talked to some people down here and former chiefs and said, talk to me about the city. And really had a good understanding and felt comfortable with what we were seeing. So it worked out, and Kathy and I moved down here in July of 2017, and it's been a great place to be and to learn all about the wonderful people who are here and the intensity of our community and the coolness of the vibe of our community. And it's just can't think of a better place to be.
Me either. Santa Cruz is the best. And we have our character and all things that are, especially all cities are experiencing, but it's a really incredible city to be a part of. So we're happy to have you here.
Oh, thanks.
I remember when you first came, Chief Andy, and you really went intentionally to our community to really hear their needs, to identify priorities, but also really talked a lot about wanting to move forward with this concept around neighborhood and community policing. And I wonder if you want to share a little bit about that experience and sort of where we are today with that.
Yeah, so just before COVID hit, we'd actually already had it planned to go back out into the communities and to do the community meetings again. We felt it was time. We've gotten pretty far down the road, but then COVID hit, and now we can't go into a space together, it seems. Even with or without masks with that many people. So we're going to wait a little bit until we can get beyond this. So when we went to the first, series of community meetings, it was really interesting for us to be able to listen to the community, get their input in a kind of a structured format where people could go and put dots on a map and tell us what their problems were and what their priorities were based on crime type. And, what we found was that one of the charts was violent crime, property crimes, nuisance crimes, miscellaneous, and so forth. And nuisance crimes was by far and away the largest concern to the members of our community. I mean, gang violence and all that kind of thing, there's virtually no response on that, which is not surprising. In many communities, you get this. But at the same time, we saw the intensity of that, and they also helped us construct a mission statement. And part of the mission statement was that we would work with neighborhoods to try to correct problems in each of those neighborhoods. So now we have it structured where we have 3 neighborhood teams down from 5, where we have sergeants and officers assigned and CSOs and rangers assigned to each of those teams that go out into the neighborhoods, try to identify problems, work with the community to solve those problems, and hopefully work shoulder to shoulder with community members to make quality of life better. Let's face it, it's an uphill battle. We have an enormous homeless problem, and it seems that it's gotten more intense, especially after the fires. And this summer with COVID and all the other things we have going on, And so we're working again to try to solve those problems.
Well, I know that you mentioned that no sort of topic was off the table here, and I was going to.
Can I recant on that?
Oh, it'll be a great. It's just
That's all good.
It'll be a great conversation. But you mentioned the homelessness issue, and it's really interesting because I know we see in the city of Santa Cruz sort of just this most visible homeless population. And I, working in education, have seen so many faces of homelessness. We had 4,000 students counted this last time. We counted our numbers who were homeless, homeless kids throughout our county. We have our foster youth, our transition age youth. So there's so many different populations. And so I really believe that, one, we have to focus on prevention. Two, how are we supporting families and kids? And how are we meeting people where they are in terms of their individual needs? And it is an uphill battle. It's very challenging and difficult because it's a challenging and difficult, complex social issue. So with that, it impacts some of the homelessness itself is not a crime, and nobody should be penalized for their economic status. However, there is also elements sometimes of crime associated with certain populations, whether they're homeless or they're drug addicted. And what we see is, I think what you were speaking about in terms of the issues around nuisance crimes and quality of life experiences. What's your thought about how, police have kind of become this role of sort of the catch-all for society's challenges? And, what would be your dream solution?
So, yeah, that's lots to unpack there. First of all, it kind of aligns with your health and all policies model, is that we really can't solve these problems without looking at the health side of this. And, what are the three primary drivers of homelessness? Mental health, drug addiction, and public housing, or adequate housing. Which of those are the responsibility of the police? None. So one could argue drug addiction from the standpoint of stopping the flow of drugs into our country. And we certainly do make a lot of drug arrests. But let's face it, we've done gigantic drug cases. And the next day, the same amount of people are addicted, the same amount of people are using drugs. And that's becomes our responsibility to try to interdict that system. So for me to have a way to solve this problem from a law enforcement perspective, that means we'd have to have jail space adequate to house all those people. That's not a solution. We're not going to house at $75,000 or $100,000 a year every homeless person that's out there. And no taxpayer is going to want to pay that bill. Plus, it'd be inhumane and unjust. So I think that there has to be a couple of solutions. One is we have to get the county engaged at a higher level than they currently are. I think that in some ways they've really stepped up during the COVID crisis. And I really appreciate the support from Brian Coonery and Bruce McPherson and some of the others to really step up in this area. So that's really helpful. And so we need to step up with, one, adequate mental health beds. Some of these folks are really difficult in terms of their ability to reason, their ability to care for themselves, but they still don't meet the criteria under 5150 of the Health and Safety Code to incarcerate them. It becomes an issue of liberty, and we're not going to just incarcerate people because they're unsightly or it makes people uncomfortable. Second thing is we need more beds for drug addiction. There has to be people who are capable in helping people get past their drug addiction. And then third thing, there has to be adequate housing. And in this community, that's pretty tough. That's a pretty tall order. But so policy has to be developed around that, or else we're just going to continue to do what we've always done, which is shove them from one location to another, and then run an incredible risk civil litigation that could wind up in the millions of dollars in judgments if we do it inappropriately. And so we try to be very judicious about what we're doing and how we're doing it to protect the city and protect the rights of the individuals and protect all of our community members who are really tired of the disorder and the chaos. And so it's trying to balance all three of those together.
Thanks for your response to that. I think you're right. I think there's the mental health issue and adequate beds and space, and there's the drug addiction issue and treatment space. And then you combine that with the lack of housing and poverty. It's really challenging. And we don't as a city do mental health and substance abuse, although, we work with our partners. So, as you mentioned, we clearly need to continue to find ways to just partner with all that have a stake in this to come up with a comprehensive solution. And that said, in terms of, potential enforcement, like what would you want like a Santa Cruz community member or neighbor to know if there's an oversized vehicle or a camp or there's a bike, shop happening? Like, what would you suggest to that resident?
Yeah, well, certainly still continue to call us. We want their information, we want their input, and we are responding to those locations. We are still writing citations and towing vehicles whenever we can, and also taking enforcement action on the camps. Now, one has to remember, though, we can still write as many tickets as we want. They're not going to go to jail for that. That is not a jailable offense. And so what we frequently do is we ask them to move on, write them a citation or not write them a citation, and then realize that they're going to go to the next spot where we're going to get another radio call, but it solves the problem for that person for that day. Now, these aren't solutions. These are just ways of trying to move the problem along. We need longer term solutions. We met on the phone today with staff to try to find bigger solutions and better ideas. And, so this is an ongoing issue, but continue to call us. We will respond. We're trying to prioritize based on the staffing levels of what we can do to make sure that we're doing the enforcement necessary.
Yeah. No, I completely understand, and you're absolutely right. There's we do need bigger. We need bold solutions. We've just seen this increase in people who are experiencing homelessness in our state and a lot of coastal states throughout our nation. So definitely, it's the time. Hopefully now to kind of reinvent how we are going to attempt to handle some of these issues. And I think what we can do is move away from this sort of downstream approach, but really looking at how are we investing upstream. So maybe I'll just sort of switch gears really quick, and let's talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was interesting. I was talking to somebody about the difference between the All Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter, and really thinking about how we as a society also have an opportunity to talk about kind of what that says to me is the difference between like equity and equality, right? And so, I was thinking about like if our daughters had, the same size bike as my husband, my daughter's 5'10", then it's clearly not going to work, right? So one needs training wheels, one needs another smaller bike. So that's sort of the equity lens, and then the equality lens is everybody gets the same bike, right? And so as we're thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement, we're really thinking about not only the recent events where we've seen law enforcement murder Black people, and that's caught and on technology now, you can see it. Not that I don't think that hasn't been happening. It's just we're seeing it. And it's spurred this movement around law enforcement practices. But for me, it's also so much more. It's around what I was sort of talking about a couple of days ago, housing segregation. It's around zoning. It's around loaning Black people capital to buy houses. It's by community design, and that's sort of the essence of what Health and All Policies is trying to repair. But I know different chiefs and different communities are experiencing kind of this social movement around Black Lives Matter differently. And I want you to share a little bit about how you have been experiencing it and what you are doing, and sort of just your overall thoughts about the topic.
Well, I think we're at a pivotal, thank you, that word, moment in history where some don't see this as a tectonic shift in the way we police. I do. I think that this is the one time where we really need to get this right. And, you know, it was interesting. I was doing some research today and doing training for my command staff on potential civil unrest over the election. And so I was putting the PowerPoint together and doing some research and got an idea of how many riots there have been in the United States. I mean, full on big stuff riots, almost 500. And over the time frame. That doesn't count the individual. I'm talking about movements of riots. And I went through and kind of clicked on almost all of them, and almost all of them, or not all of them, about half of them, it appeared, were based solely on people of color. I was shocked. And I knew the 60s riots. I knew there were some riots back, right around when, freedom of slavery, from slavery and those kind of things. But I was shocked at how many riots were based on people who were white going and terrorizing people who were Black. Look at the Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I could go on and on. I said that was shocking to me that there were that many. I just had no idea, my own ignorance. So I really see this as a new way of us doing business that's more just for everybody. And because we say Black Lives Matter, that doesn't mean that other lives don't matter. It means that right now is our time to focus on people who are Black and African American in our nation, and recognize that it has been unjust, and that we can do much better as a profession, as individuals, and as a country. And so we've worked hard with the Black community here, many, not all of them, but many of them, and you've been part of that, Martine, thank you. And Justin, the mayor, Justin Cummins, the mayor, has also been part of that. And Joy Flynn and many others. And so it's been helpful. We've put together 22 policies that I can shift internally to make it safer for everybody. And that should also means that it could be also safer for people of color in the Black community. Some of them are targeted just based on race. Some are targeted just based on policy. In terms of us being able to ensure that we, for instance, do search warrants correctly. In the future, and we've already written memos on this, if you're going to serve a dynamic search warrant, it means we're going to bust the door and go in and throw flashbangs and do all the stuff that cops do. That has to be approved by a deputy chief. And in the past, it could be approved by just the courts and a detective, and you could go on. So we're making a lot of changes to hopefully increase the safety. But the thing that must change the most in policing all over the country is culture. And if the culture doesn't change, we can put all the policies in place we want, and we'll still have significant problems. So we have to work on the culture and find ways to alter the culture of policing, to understand the difference on how our policing and how we could police. And for us, it's going to start October 7th. The Santa Cruz Warriors coaching staff, who are primarily Black, and the management team from Santa Cruz Police Department are going to meet together for lunch and talk about with Reggie Stevens, and talk about a program that we can put together to bridge that gap between the Black community and the police officers. And I'm really excited to see what we are able to accomplish at that meeting.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. We hear, and I know you've heard around just the funding and the movement to defund the police. And I think you're right, as a nation, we have over-invested not only in our military budget, but at many local levels, there is a sort of a disproportionate amount of funding that's gone to police, right? And so what I've seen is just every community is really different. And you speak about the culture shift, and I was reading about Camden, New Jersey, and I'm not sure if you read that example as well, where it was just so toxic that they basically dismantled their entire police department and then rebuilt it from the ground up to essentially establish a new culture of policing. And as a result, they have a very successful relationship with their community from what I've heard and read. And I think for Santa Cruz, we're obviously not in that situation, and maybe other jurisdictions are. So where do you feel, where do you feel we are? And in terms of the funding allocations, if you want to speak to that, as well as in terms of the culture shift that you'd like to see changed.
Well, Camden was a successful project. I think there's not enough data to really show how successful it was. Is it successful for the long run, or just as there seemed to be a pretty good shift? Crime did go down significantly there, but that was a community that was so out of control it wasn't funny. I've been in Camden before, and I've been at that police department doing training in the past. But one has to also remember that they've got almost 4 officers per 1,000 residents. We've got about 1.5. So yeah, we could restructure. But if you gave me 4 officers per 1,000 residents, that would be a blessing. But we don't need that many, to be very honest. And I would never ask for anything like that. But I do think that, if we could structure the departments where we're not handling the stuff that frequently comes, like for instance, homelessness, mental health, drug addiction, alcohol abuse. If that was the cahoots model, where somebody else other than a police officer can go and help that person get help, I'd be all in favor of it. If that means losing a body or two as a result of that from our authorized strength, then I'm willing to do that. I think that what we have to be careful of is the expectations from the community. Even with the furlough and the drawdown of police officers now because of the agreement with the city, and now we're going through this additional 1.7 million budget cut, resources are getting will get even more scarce. And if that is the case, you do less with less, not more with less. To quote a friend, Jim from The Office. And so that's a really tough balance. So as long as we can adjust the expectations of the community so that they know that we're not going to respond to certain things, okay, I'm fine with that. But the community has to have that expectation that it will get better, not worse, by doing that. And that means it'll have to take a lot of salespersonship to let the community know what the response will be and how that will take place. Doing that means adjusting our expectations for our officers as well. Is that what I don't want them to do is be thinking like RoboCops, is that I'm only here for the felony crimes. No, we want you to take care of all kinds of problems in our community, not just the serious stuff. And so that becomes a danger in doing it if you're going to defund or the police too much. And of course, those who are talking about abolishing the police, that's just, it's kind of hard to even listen to that, to be honest, because there's no sense of reality there. I don't know if you saw the articles in the media today. Minneapolis, voted to defund, and now they're screaming because crime has gone up in Minneapolis. They want the police to do something about it, but you just disbanded, in some ways, the police department. So I think it just has to be a balance, and I do think that you're right. We can strike that balance as a community and as a profession and as a nation. But somebody has to be willing to step up and do that, and that'll be interesting to see if anybody will.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I'm not, I personally like to have, informed policies. So, you bring up the Minneapolis example. I think that's, a knee-jerk reaction to obvious, concern around what just happened in their community naturally. And it's really important to try to do your best to make the most informed policy decisions as possible. And as we move forward, I think cities across the nation are going to experience economic challenges. So for me as in sort of a policymaker position, we have to also think about what are the results that we want to achieve and how do we get there? And that doesn't happen overnight. And that's what I hear you saying as well.
Right.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and I know. And I always like to just sort of think of post-COVID, post this, major natural disaster, looking at recovery. What is even reflecting, as you mentioned, on our history of the profession of law enforcement, its origins and roots, the Black Lives Matter movement, what's your vision moving forward? And then feel free to share also anything else you'd like to say.
Yeah. Well, my vision for moving forward with policing is that we really begin to grasp and understand that we serve the community. We're not an entity in and of ourselves. And without our community, without us serving our fellow community members and us understanding what their hopes and dreams and goals and aspirations are, that's where policing should be. And trying to figure out which voices do you listen to on a daily basis, because you wind up listening as a policymaker, you wind up getting all these squeaky wheels, but yet there's this enormous wheel out there that's not squeaking, that does care deeply. And so how do you manage, what to listen to and understand how you move forward? So my goal for policing in our department, more importantly, is that we really police in a just manner. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's LGBTQ community, whether it's gender-based or race-based, that people view us as on their side. And in doing the research on how we handle protests, especially with the upcoming elections, one thing I want our community to know is that we are there to make sure that you do it safely, that you are safe in doing it, and that you are able to exercise your First Amendment rights without impingement by the police department. We're there to support you, not be against you. And that's the culture that we need to exude for our community. A high level of emotional quota, a high level of customer service. And I get that it's a tough balance. I mean, just look at the incident over at the Staff of Life, a couple of days ago. Some people commented, well, the officer yelled at the person. Yeah, the guy had a knife and threw it at the officer ultimately. But you're trying to get people to stop, so then you can now start talking to them and getting them to calm down. It's a tough job. Our people do an amazing job. I'm so proud of them, especially we have a very young department right now who has done a phenomenal job learning and growing and don't even know what they don't know yet. But at the same time, I'm really proud of them that they work hard, they're anxious to learn, and they're really growing rapidly. Got great new leaders in place. Bernie Escalante and Jose Garcia are wonderful leaders. John Bush and Arnold Vasquez and Carter Jones are our lieutenants. And we've got a bevy of sergeants who are just, anxious to get out there and take care of business. So we really feel like we're in a good space right now, and look forward to see how we can serve this community the best. I encourage people to get a hold of us though, and tell us what we can do better. We want to be able to hear from our community and learn from them.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I think I had a whole bunch more questions, but I think, we have a half hour, so I really want to respect your time. Well, thank you so much for your just transparency, for being accessible, and for having these really honest conversations about the complexities of the position in our society. So thank you also to you and your staff for all your service to our city. So I appreciate the time today.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Martine. And again, thank you for your leadership and your support of the police department.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy.
Bye.
See you later. Bye. Next week, we'll be speaking with our Santa Cruz Fire Chief, Jason Haidu. The following week, we'll be talking to Black Lives Matter community activist, mom, and wonderful friend, Joy Flynn. And then the following week, we get our special guest, Congressman Jimmy Panetta. So we look forward to staying connected with you. You can also follow us on YouTube, or for more information, visit martinewatkins.com.